It was supposed to be an ordinary flight, a chance for one young black girl to step into the skies with excitement and hope. But within moments of boarding, a sharp voice cut through the air, telling her to wait at the back. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to notice, while others watched in silence. Humiliated, she lowered her head and obeyed. What no one expected, not even the flight attendant who had dismissed her, was that only minutes later, this same girl would be seen again. Not in the back of the plane, but in the cockpit, where her presence would change everything. The morning had started like any other. The airport buzzed with travelers dragging rolling bags, rushing to make flights, or hugging loved ones goodbye. Among them was a young black girl, full of anticipation. She wasn't just another passenger. This trip meant something more. She carried herself with quiet determination, her eyes reflecting both nerves and pride. She had worked hard to be here, to prove herself in ways many people doubted she could. As she approached the gate, her heart raced. Flying wasn't just a dream, it was her calling. Every late night of studying, every challenge she had faced, had led her to this very moment. But the journey had not been easy. Growing up, she had endured whispers of doubt, subtle exclusions, and outright dismissals. People had told her that certain places, certain roles, simply weren't meant for someone like her. Yet, she had never let those voices define her path. Boarding the plane, she carried not only her small bag, but also the weight of her aspirations. The rows of seats stretched before her, filled with strangers who had no idea of the story she brought with her. To them, she might have seemed like just another young traveler. But to her, every step onto that aircraft symbolized years of resilience. What she didn't know, however, was that within minutes, someone's casual act of prejudice would try to reduce her to nothing more than her skin color. And that cruel moment would set the stage for an unforgettable revelation. As she stepped further into the narrow aisle, the hum of the overhead fans and chatter of passengers filled the cabin. The girl glanced at her boarding pass, scanning the rows, when a sudden, sharp voice cut through the air. "Wait at the back." The words weren't said kindly. They were clipped and dismissive, carrying an edge that stung like a slap. The flight attendant stood with folded arms, blocking her path, eyes narrowed in a way that left no doubt. This wasn't about protocol, it was about her. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The passengers closest to the scene shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away quickly, burying themselves in phones or magazines, pretending not to notice. A few watched with wide eyes but said nothing. The silence was deafening. The girl froze, clutching her small bag. She knew the humiliation wasn't about where she should stand. It was about what she represented. The subtle message was clear: you don't belong here. Slowly, without meeting anyone's eyes, she lowered her head and moved toward the back of the plane. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of history pressed against her shoulders. She thought of the times she had been told to wait her turn, to stand aside, to accept less. The echoes of past injustices lived in that single moment, amplified by the silence of those who could have spoken up. She sank into a seat near the rear, her chest tightening with a mix of anger and sorrow. She wanted to scream, to call out the cruelty for what it was, but she swallowed it down. The flight prepared for takeoff. Seatbelts clicked, announcements echoed overhead. Outwardly, the cabin returned to normal, but inside her, emotions swirled. Humiliation. Yes, but also a deep resolve. She reminded herself why she was here. She hadn't spent years fighting for her place in the skies just to be diminished by one person's prejudice. Minutes passed, and the engines roared to life. As the plane lifted into the clouds, the girl's gaze turned forward. The very front of the aircraft, the cockpit, seemed impossibly far away, a world reserved for others. Yet, that was where she belonged. She was not merely a passenger. She carried with her hours of training, exams conquered, and the unshakable dream of becoming a pilot. What no one around her knew, not the passengers, not the dismissive attendant, not even those who had silently witnessed her humiliation, was that her destination wasn't just the back of the plane. It was the controls, the captain's seat, the very heart of the flight itself. And soon, the moment would come when the truth could no longer be hidden. The seatbelt sign flicked off, and the steady hum of the plane filled the cabin. Passengers settled into their routines, headphones, books, and idle conversations. To most, it was just another flight. But for one passenger, the young black girl told to wait at the back, it was far from ordinary. Moments later, a quiet stir spread. Near the front, the cockpit door opened briefly, and there she was, stepping forward with calm authority, her uniform crisp, her stride confident. The same girl who had been dismissed minutes earlier was now revealed not as a passenger, but as one of the pilots. Entrusted with guiding the very aircraft soaring above the clouds, gasps rippled through the rows. The very passengers who had watched her humiliation in silence now saw her in a completely different light. Some exchanged guilty glances. Others lowered their eyes, realizing the weight of what they had witnessed. The flight attendant who had ordered her to the back froze, her expression shifting from irritation to disbelief. There was no confrontation, no need for raised voices. The truth spoke louder than any argument ever could. The girl's presence in that cockpit shattered the prejudice that had attempted to confine her. She had not only risen above the insult, she had risen into the very position that symbolized leadership and trust. In that moment, the cabin itself seemed transformed. The story was no longer about humiliation, but about resilience. The girl had reclaimed her place, not just on the plane, but in the eyes of everyone who had doubted her. What had begun as an act of dismissal had turned into a revelation no one would ever forget. The rest of the flight carried on as planned, but for those who had witnessed what happened, it was impossible to forget. They had seen a young black woman diminish to the back of the plane, and then rise, with grace and quiet strength, into the cockpit. It was more than a personal triumph. It was a statement written not in words, but in undeniable proof. For the passengers, it became a silent lesson. Prejudice may whisper, doubt may shout, but neither can erase the truth of who someone is. Those who had looked away earlier now replayed the moment in their minds, questioning their silence. The weight of their inaction pressed heavier than the altitude itself. The flight attendant avoided her gaze. The earlier arrogance dissolved into uneasy shame. Yet the girl did not need to confront her. Her very presence was confrontation enough. She had already won, not through argument, but through excellence. When the plane landed and the doors opened, passengers filed out, glancing one last time at the young pilot. Some smiled softly, others nodded, as if acknowledging not only her skill, but also her resilience. They had boarded a plane expecting an ordinary journey and left with a story that would linger long after the wheels touched the ground. For the girl, it was not about proving them wrong. It was about proving, once again, that she belonged, not just in the sky, but in every space where history had tried to push her aside. And for us, watching this unfold, the question lingers. How many dreams have been silenced because of prejudice? And how many more could take flight if only we chose to see beyond skin? The answer is in how we act, how we speak, and how we refuse to stay silent the next time injustice stands before us.